Welcome to episode 224 of the Lone Hockey Podcast. For today, we're going to be talking about some standouts in last night's matchup between the US and Sweden. So it was interesting because Sweden was in a weird situation where they, even if they won the game, they wouldn't be able to move on, they wouldn't be able to advance, and they'd just be out. So it was kind of a weird spot for them to be in since Canada won earlier. So that put them automatically in the championship game. And we know from before that, after the Saturday night game, that the US would be in the championship game as well. So now the final game is going to be between USA and Canada in Boston Thursday night. So it's going to be electric, especially I don't think it's going to be the same as last game where we see three fights again like we did the first time, but I could totally see a situation play out where the Kachucks they try to stir something up and try to create something. So but what was interesting is throughout this game is how the US they didn't seem to look as great. And I know they have some injuries, like Charlie McAvoy was hospitalized. The Chuck brothers are both out. Brady ended up playing, and Matthew was out for the whole game. But Brady ended up playing, and he got hurt. He had a net drive in how he was carrying the puck, and he ended up hitting the net. He hit the post, and he wasn't able to go for the rest of the game. And Austin Matthews sat out this game just for precautionary reasons. And so, with those guys out, that left obviously a big hole. I think the Kachucks have been the most important part to this team, more so than anybody else. I think if the Kachucks don't play Thursday, Canada's going to win this game. I think that they're that important. They've been that important and they've been relied upon in so many key situations. So if those guys are out, which I would imagine that given their personality, I don't think they're going to want to miss that game at all. And they seem like the type where they're going to take that risk, even though if they might be injured, they're not going to really tell anybody and they're just going to go out and play. And I feel like the Kachucks are going to end up playing, but just some overall standouts. I felt like there were a lot of guys in the US who weren't necessarily that noticeable. Like I noticed a lot more Swedes than anybody else. I noticed Ricard Raquel, or not Ricard Raquel. Ricard Raquel was hurt and out for this game. I noticed William Nylander. I noticed Philip Forsberg. I noticed Eric Carlson. I noticed Victor Hedman. I noticed Rasmus Dahlin. I noticed Rasmus Anderson a little bit. There are a lot of guys in terms of their back end and up front who were really noticeable. I thought their back end was really noticeable at being able to create offense and create in transition. And Sweden had one of the best decors in this tournament by far. I think theirs rivaled the US in terms of being the best. I think Canada was third. I think when you look at Sweden's decor, obviously a lot of experience, a lot of key offensive minded defensemen, but the good blend of veterans and youth on that team, I think that made Sweden really intriguing to watch in terms of their defensive core. Rasmus Dahlin being on the younger side, and then you have guys like Eric Carlson and Victor Hedman who have been around, been there, done that in the league for a very long time now, and just have been around so many different situations. And then you get a lot of offense, but a lot of defense and a lot of transition play from their whole decor in general. I think even Jonas Brodin has played really good hockey, I think, throughout this tournament. He goes unnoticed because he's playing for Sweden and he you don't necessarily hear about him a ton in the NHL too. So when you combine those two factors, he's a guy that's going to be massively underrated. And I think he's been really underrated at shutting down key guys. Like when they were playing Canada, he was shutting down key guys. When they were playing the US, he was shutting down key guys. And Jonas Brodin he's a quiet player in the sense he's not going to be relied upon a ton for his offense or how he produces, but you're getting a lot out of him defensively. And that's what he really showed yesterday and in previous games before that is how reliable he can be defensively and as a shutdown defenseman. And I thought he was awesome. He was so exciting to watch. And exciting to watch him in terms of details, like not flashy or anything, but when we really dive into the details of his game, it's really, really fascinating to watch, like how he defends on angles, how he defends using his feet, how he defends with his poise and his mental awareness, and how he's able to maintain composure in those situations, how he's able to defend line rush and cut ice in half. Like there's a lot of details when talking about Jonas Berdine, how he can just be a factor in every situation. And there's not many D, especially on Sweden, who have the ability to do that. Eric Carlson has the ability to play really good offensive minutes, but I would say on the counteracting side of that, in terms of his defensive play, you're not going to rely upon him a ton for his defensive play. You're going to rely upon the guys like Brodin and Hedman to be able to shut guys down. I think Hedman was awesome too in talking about him. When you look at Victor Hedman's the dynamic of his game, and he can play an all around game. Like he can play offense, he can play defense, he can play in transition, he can defend in transition, he can defend line rush, he can defend entries. He's really good at man-to-man coverage in D zone, and Tampa plays a heavy man-on-man system. And in terms of their swarms and how they track back and how they play in the corners of the ice defensively, and Victor Hedman's a key component to that. So with Sweden, they like I said before, I remember watching one of their first games in the tournament, and they had to shift to more of a man-on-man coverage, or shift away from more of a man-on-man coverage to more of his zone early on. I feel like they've kind of adapted to the point where they've been able to play more man-to-man throughout the tournament, and they looked more comfortable playing man-to-man. I just feel like it depends on who you're playing against. Like if you're playing Canada, it's probably best to play more of a zone. Because if you're playing man-on-man, if you're pinching all the time, especially on entries, Canada can burn you. Versus a team like Finland, who, yes, they have speed, yes, they have transition ability, and even the US. Like the US, I thought was just okay. And in doing that and in transitioning pucks. I felt like it gave Sweden an advantage in terms of their man-to-man coverage and how they could defend that. So I think Sweden overall, I think they played the better game. I was not really impressed with the US. And like I said before, you're dealing with the Kachucks, they're both out. You're dealing with Austin Matthews, who is out for precautionary reasons. He wasn't hurt or anything. And then Charlie McAvoy. So just a wide influx of talent that wasn't available for the US. And I think that kind of hurt them throughout this game.